If you're new to our parish in the last year or so, you may not understand or know that every year during Easter season, which lasts for 50 days, I try to begin my homily with a little holy humor, some kind of joke or story that ties in, that sometimes ties in with my homily, such as on Easter Sunday, it did, and sometimes just a standalone to kind of lighten the moment. The one today is that kind of story. As most of you know, Katie and George Tipker Katie are expecting their first child next month. Katie's our director of discipleship here in our parish. And they've shared for a long time that the little bundle of joy was going to be a girl, but they were withholding the name. And so it bothered me. I wanted to know the name of the little girl, and so it bothered me so much that I even had a dream about it. I had a dream that after the baby was born, I went to the hospital and I said, okay, so finally, what's the name? And they said, well, it's going to sound a little bit unusual, but we always wanted to name our child this. Her name's going to be Butter. I said, Butter? I said, I've never heard that name for a kid, but, I've never baptized anyone named Butter, but I guess I could, and so I left the hospital. They left the hospital the next day, and 2 days after they got home, the doctor called them with the parents' worst nightmare. He said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but we switched your baby. You got the wrong baby. And Katie held up her little bundle of joy and said, I can't believe it's not Butter. Somebody actually asked me last night, is that a true story? As I said in my announcements, we're beginning a 7-week homily series called On Fire, Stories of the Early Church. Historians, both religious and secular, agree that the early church grew in incredible numbers in the first 300 years after the resurrection. Acts of the Apostles tells us that on the day of Pentecost, some 3,000 new Christians were added that day. A short while later again, 5,000 new Christians were added all at once. And while there was no record keeping in the early church, most historians agree that just 60 or so years after the death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus, the church numbered about 100,000 Christians. From a very small group of ragtag men and women to the world's religion, no one can argue about the growth of Christianity and that it grew quickly. The question is, why? Why did it grow so quickly? Why did this happen? I know it's trite to say it this way, but the reason can be summed up in that 1960s guitar mass favorite, they'll know we are Christians by our love. Like Mother Teresa of Calcutta, the early Christians pioneered a way of authentic love that inspired other people to join them. Church historian Eusebius, writing in the 3rd century, tells how during the reign of King Maximus, there was a severe famine and pestilence that broke out in the empire. Eusebius writes this, for they, referring to the Christians, alone in the midst of such ills, showed their sympathy and humanity by their deeds. Every day, some Christians continued caring for and burying the dead, for there were multitudes that had no one to care for them. Others collected in one place those who were afflicted by the famine throughout the whole city and gave them all bread. In this homily series, On Fire, Stories of the Early Church, we'll examine that incredible growth of the early church. But we'll examine and observe this incredible growth with an eye toward one simple question. Can this be us? Can this be us here at JP2? The first story we're going to look at is our gospel reading today, the Emmaus story. Now let me set the stage for this. Luke tells us that this event happened on that very first day of the week, the evening of that first day of the week. So it happened on that very first Easter Sunday. And 2 of Jesus' disciples are already calling it quits. They're going back home, back to Emmaus. They had been in Jerusalem for Passover, and they were disciples of Jesus, and there was a buzz about this particular Passover. Like so many Jews who were disciples of Jesus, they had come to believe that he was the Messiah. And the word on the street was that at this Passover, he was going to take his throne. All the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit together. He was of the line of David, check. He was a miracle worker, check. He was popular with the people, check. He was joyously received on Palm Sunday. Check. All the pieces were falling together, and the Roman tyranny over the Jewish people was about to come to an end. Everything was perfect. Everything was perfect until Thursday night. Then suddenly, the word was out. Jesus had been arrested, and his apostles had abandoned him. Suddenly, the word was out. There was going to be a trial tomorrow, and Pilate was going to be the judge. Suddenly, the word was out. He might even be sentenced to death. Then Friday came, and it was all true. They watched from a distance as their hope died right there on the cross on Good Friday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Jesus was gone, and so was all that they had hoped for. Oh, they waited around for a couple of days, but it was over. They knew it was over. They had even seen the tomb. It was a big cave with an even bigger rock protecting it. Oh, Jesus was gone for sure. Maybe he wasn't the king. Maybe he wasn't the Messiah after all. And so on Sunday evening, they decided to go back home. Maybe we can get our old jobs back. We'll just have to wait a little bit longer for our Messiah. And it's here where Jesus meets them, Cleopas and another unnamed disciple. And what Jesus does when he meets them is what I want to talk about today. The first question he asks them is a simple one. What are you talking about? Notice Jesus meets them where they are. They're on the road discussing everything that happened. They're going home and Jesus meets them on the way. They're talking about what has happened, and so Jesus asks them, what happened? And they answer, are you the only one who doesn't know what's happened? Now, Jesus could have said here, oh, I know what happened. Look, I've got the nail marks right here in my hands. I've got this cut in my side. Look at where the crown of thorns was. Oh, I know what happened. But he doesn't do that. He wants to see where they are. He wants to listen to them. He wants to know what they're thinking, what they believe about these incredible events that have just taken place. And so they go through it all line by line. There was this guy named Jesus. He was a prophet and worked miracles. Our own leaders handed him over to Pilate, who had him killed. And now 3 days later, some of the women from our group have said that he's alive. But we know that can't be true. People don't rise from the dead. And here is where Jesus does something that is a model for all of us. He begins to pour into them. Haven't you ever read what the prophet said? Didn't all these things have to happen? And then Luke says this, then beginning with Moses and the prophets, he interpreted for them what referred to him in all the scriptures. Jesus begins to pour into them from the only Bible they knew, the Old Testament. And he might have said something like this, remember when God told Moses to mount a bronze serpent on a pole and raise it up so that whoever looks at it might be healed? Or he could have been talking about, or he would have said, could he have been talking about when Jesus was raised up so that all who look at him would be healed? He might have also said this, remember Isaiah 53, the suffering servant, but he was wounded for the wrong we did, he was crushed for our evil. The punishment which made us well was given to him, and we are healed because of his wounds. We don't know exactly what he told them, but it says that he talked about all the scriptures that referred to him. And depending on whose count you take, there are anywhere from 45 to 645 verses of the Old Testament that refer to Jesus as the Messiah. I think he might have added some of the words he himself said. On at least 3 occasions, Jesus predicted his death and resurrection. Here is one of them. Out of Mark 9:32, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days, he will rise. My friends, here is the point and the lesson for us. Jesus took time and shared his time with them. How much time? We don't really know. At least 7 miles worth. And they said they stopped at least once, so I think we're talking at least 2 to 3 hours, maybe even more. And then at their invitation, when they invite this stranger into their home, he breaks bread with them and their eyes are opened. And I love this line, were not our hearts burning within us? The verb that Luke uses here is kaio, and it literally means to set on fire. That's why I titled this series, On Fire, Stories of the Early Church. And now here's the point for us. Jesus poured in to Cleopas and this other unnamed disciple. And by the way, I think the reason this is an unnamed disciple is so that we can put ourselves in this story. I love that phrase, pouring into others. It means walking with someone, giving them your time, your listening ear, your caring heart. It means offering them a sincere invitation, like that of the Samaritan woman at the well who says, come and see a man who told me everything I had done. As I mentioned in the beginning of this homily, the early church grew, and it grew rapidly. And it grew because people came to know Jesus, that people who came to know Jesus told others about him. This is the man who changed my life. This Jesus they had come to know and love. But Father Tom, you might say, how do you expect me to find time to pour into someone else? I've got my own family to worry about. How am I supposed to care for another? My schedule is crazy. How can this happen? Or you might say, Father Tom, I'm not spiritual enough. I'm not holy enough. I don't know enough theology. I don't know how to begin. What exactly are you asking me to do? And I understand all that, I do. But I also see it happening already all around us. People just like you pouring into others. Aaron and Clint Horine recently led our Rite of Christian Initiation of Children. This is the program that prepares the kids to celebrate the sacraments of initiation, baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. They didn't have any kids going through the program, but they wanted to pour themselves into other kids so that they could be prepared to receive their sacraments. 17-year-old Peyton Lacey, he's sitting right out there, is going to be heading up one of our confirmation small groups to help other teens celebrate the sacrament of confirmation. Peyton doesn't have a degree in theology yet, but he has a heart that simply wants to share with others. Marvin Pop, who's also sitting out here, I just saw him a minute ago. Where are you, Marvin? Oh, there he is back there. Marvin Pop came to me some time ago on fire with divine mercy. He wasn't sure what God was calling him to do, but he knew God was calling him to something, and it had to do with divine mercy. And from that initial conversation, Marvin began pouring into other people, and our Divine Mercy Committee was formed, and we just hosted our first Divine Mercy Sunday with the direction of that committee. Marvin and that group have been pouring into people ever since. Those are just 3 examples. I could easily come up with 10 or 15 others. People pouring into other people in our parish and helping people come to know Jesus a little bit better. The early church was all about that pouring into one another. Perhaps we here at JP2 should be about that as well. And to that end, we're beginning a new style of ministry here at JP2. We're calling it our Emmaus Ministry, and we have a brochure that you can pick up if you're interested in serving in this capacity. It's simply people pouring into other people. We want this for our baptismal families, someone to journey with people before and after a baptism. We want this for our confirmation candidates and our RCIA candidates, people to journey with them. We want it for our new parishioners so that they get connected to our parish. We want it for someone who's experienced a death, widows, widowers, perhaps somebody who's died by suicide. We want it for our homebound, our divorced, our single parents, our newly married, and so many others that maybe you can think about that other people that we haven't even mentioned today. Are there ways that you can assist someone else? If you're interested in serving in our Emmaus ministry, see Marlene or myself after Mass. We'll give you one of these brochures and we can talk about it. Now, you can make a lot of excuses on why it's not you. There's a story told about a man who falls into a ditch, and a doctor walks by and he said, "Hey doc, I fell into this ditch. Can you give me a hand?" And the doctor writes out a prescription and throws it down to him. A couple of minutes later, a priest walks by. He said, "Hey father, I fell into this ditch. Can you give me a hand out?" and the priest writes a prayer out and throws it down to him. A couple of minutes later, a friend of his walks by. He says, John, I fell into this ditch. Can you help me out? And John jumps down into the ditch with him. And he says, John, are you stupid? Now we're both down here. And John says, I know, but I've been here and I know the way out. Where have you been that somebody else might be going right now? In what ditch can you jump into to help someone else out? I said at the beginning of this homily that for the next 7 weeks, we're going to hear stories of the early church and its incredible growth with an eye toward a simple question: can this be us? So, can it be you? Can you pour yourself into someone else? Can you give some time for another person? Can you share your faith with a fellow parishioner? Maybe it's as simple as accompanying someone to Alpha, or inviting someone to Mass or some other parish event. Maybe it's a discipleship group or a connect group, and maybe it's being an Emmaus partner. But the point is this: the early church grew because lots of people were on fire and because they took care of one another. My question remains: can this be us? Can this be you?